Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2 is halfway over, and while it is not universally hailed as the best modern Trek show, it certainly has a preponderance of fans proclaiming it as such. Each episode is a short film, beautifully shot, using camera tricks, an augmented reality wall, and practical sets to transport viewers to, well, Strange New Worlds. I had the pleasure of sitting down with one of the directors of photography for the season, Benji Bakshi, to talk to him about how the magic is made. I'm T. Rick Jones, and this is your Daily Star Trek News. You are one of, I understand, three DPs. So how's that scheduling work out over the course of the season for the director?
Yeah, well, this is the first show I've done where there's three cinematographers, which is essentially a team. It's almost like we have our own department within us. But it's great because we're very collaborative. We support each other. And during the course of the schedule of the show, we've had to cover each other in various capacities for COVID or regular production, rescheduling and things like that. So I do 4 episodes. Glenn Keenan, who did the pilot and a lot of the first season, shoots 4 episodes, and Ian Anderson shoots 2 episodes. And we also, when we're available during our, call it, break, inevitably somebody has some time, we fill in and we do what's called the blend, which is the technical process of making the virtual world cohesive to the physical set when you're shooting on the volume.
I want to talk a little bit about the AR wall because I think that is one of the most fascinating new pieces of technology for filming. You know, I've seen a couple of documentaries on how it works. I just think it's really cool. So explain to me the process of, what needs to happen first to be using the AR wall. I mean, things have to be designed to be put up there, I'm sure. And then how do you blend all that together, the reality and the augmented reality? How's that all work?
Sure. Well, the show had a big learning curve during season 1, which I like to say, thankfully, they got to figure out before I came in. I started on season 2, and normally this is the first show I've ever done where I didn't do the first season. So I like to be involved in, creating the feel. But in this case, it was sort of nice because there was a lot of growing pains, and I came in when they had mostly figured it all out. But the process is, I want to say, custom to every show and the demands of it. So, for example, Mandalorian built a 360 volume, and that sort of gives you sound problems because you're in an echo chamber, but it makes it easier to shoot, everywhere. That also means that the crew has to sort of enter and exit this space. We built one that has an opening on one end, which allows us to basically record better dialogue, and it gives us better access. But of course, now we have an opening on one side. So that's an example of how each show has to assess how they're going to use this space. The writers and the showrunners, Akiva Goldsman and Henry Alonzo Myers, really took a lead in wanting to create a show that was made for the wall, as we call it.
Sure.
So they learned about the technical process and began writing for, we call them assets, to be created. So much so that we begin working on these virtual worlds 3 or 4 months in advance of shooting. And that's way before any, normal physical episode prep, even, or before the directors are totally active. So we're working with a goal in mind to create these worlds for a narrative purpose that's, the characters have to interact with, and how are these things going to feel? How are they going to look? What's the environment? What's the time of day? What does the atmosphere look like? What's the terrain? Um, and we're doing that way in advance of even like a fully published story. So the nice thing about that process is um, I get to work with the production designer, the visual effects department, the showrunners, the art department as a whole, the set design, lighting design, all very far in advance, and so we get to weigh in on the ultimate result, and our voices get to be heard, and it's very collaborative. So by the time we're shooting these spaces, they're kind of our babies, and we're very much in tune with what can be done. Um, so it's a unique experience for sure. It's been very successful for us because, and especially the producing director, Chris Fisher, is a champion of bringing the teams together and making sure everyone is doing their best work. And it's a really successful process. And I've heard other stories of other movies or shows that try to do the AR wall a different way. And sometimes it's not successful because it really still comes down to a very collaborative narrative sort of filmmaking approach to the whole thing.
My understanding is it can do more than just a simple green or blue screen. It can, it really makes things come alive for the actors in a way that acting to a green head does not.
Yeah, well, beyond the feedback, if you will, which is of course extremely important. The actors have, gone on record and in other press described how good it makes them feel when they're in these worlds.
Yeah.
But for me as a, sort of technician, creative technician, one of the best things about it is it's providing a baseline lighting approach on its own, because we have a full LED ceiling as well, and
Oh,
that factors into reflections. There could be a brighter part of the sky that gets mapped onto this space, and this part of the set is lit by that sky, and this part of the set is not lit by that. And we go in there and we put digital shapes, circles or stretched out things or little light bars or even patterns that break up the texture. And what you're doing is you're maxing out the output of the LEDs or not, and creating digital lighting, almost like you're photoshopping the lighting onto these areas. And so you can create really beautiful naturalistic lighting from the space itself, and that minimizes the need for us to go in there and set up movie lights on stands, which we still do, but it becomes another option for us to avoid or to accentuate. And that, I think, is a big game changer beyond the fact that you're seeing everything that you're trying to capture in camera live.
yeah.
And so with the green screen, I like to think that that is an older approach that was less successful because you don't get that immediate feedback, and that's sort of what it's all about, to try to sell really a pretend world in front of you.
Now, does every set have an AR wall?
Right now we have, for season 2, we used one dedicated volume space,
Okay.
and we change out the sets as needed. One of the things that you know I didn't fully understand when I started this process, that I now totally respect, is that it still relies on the physical set to be built. That's still what everybody's interacting with. And it's like 100 by 100 foot area that is still the stage.
Sure.
And we're extending that. Of course, we get the chance to light it and create lots of interactivity, but they have to create a floor. They, that could be sand or rocks or something interior,
Sure.
and they have to build the actual set, and sometimes there's physical practical lighting embedded in that. And so it is still the traditional process of building and removing a set, putting in the new set, then bringing in the digital world, and so forth. So it's an assembly line that is so meticulously organized that way in advance, we're talking months, there is a chart that has every single asset for every episode, when it's going to load in, when it's going to load out, how it's going to be shot, how long we have to shoot it, to the point where we understand that if this episode needs more AR wall than another, it gets this many days, and then that means this one only has 2 days or something like that. And it all depends on what the stories need.
Yeah.
But it is definitely an assembly line that's dedicated, and it's a separate space from the main sets. The main standing sets like the bridge or the sick bay and things like that, those don't have any volume or AR component yet. They do utilize blue screen still or live projection. And we're trying to continually push the boundaries of what kind of live projection we can have outside of windows or view screens or things like that, so that we can keep extending the world once again in camera so that we can see what we have.
So you've done so far, two of your episodes have aired. Ad Astra per Astra was just fantastic. And the other one that just aired last week is The Lotus Eaters.
Right.
And that was I think for my money, the most beautifully shot one that I've seen yet. It was just it was gorgeous. You played around with racking focus, you did all these different camera tricks, and it really told a story.
That one was somewhat of a darling. Again, we're talking about these episodes so far in advance. They're basically like movies to us.
Yeah.
Because it's rare, I think, to have so much lead time, even from a headspace perspective, before you're shooting the episode, that you've really tried to think about everything. And that one, the Rigel 7 world, we definitely were in discussion and spent a lot of a brain power trying to make it immersive and feel menacing but beautiful, and really do it justice, since it was as such a legacy from the very first Star Trek episode ever.
Yeah.
That, even touching that topic means you really need to succeed.
And we haven't seen that world since the Menagerie Parts 1 and 2 in the original series, which used most of the original pilot episode as with the sort of frame around it. So I wanted to ask you, did you reference those episodes? Did you go back to the cage and the menagerie and take a look at what they did, and try to replicate some of that, or are you just sort of working off your own thing?
We definitely referenced those episodes. I mean, again, to credit the showrunners, Akiva and Henry, the writing team, and Jonathan Lee, the production designer, and his team of artists, they're all very talented. They all know Star Trek very well, and they do all their research. And one of the things that I think has been really successful about this show is the honoring and the interplay between legacy and a continuation of the contemporary story that we can now experience. Basically, a deeper dive into what we already know, and the interweaving to, because this is a prequel series, to set those things up and dovetail into what we already know.
Yeah.
So we're always referencing existing material. I would say, a good 30%, like a third of any given discussion about creative needs on the show is about legacy. So they usually start there, and we're spiraling onward to make it more interesting, or how can we make this serve the drama but not break what we already know. Of course, one of the fun things that they do every season is play with temporal disturbances or alternate realities so that we can go somewhere but maybe come back. And if you look at the timeline of Star Trek in general, which spans a couple centuries between all the different series,
Yeah.
they're always sort of like, well, this one went there, but it came back and they went to the future and they affected that. So it's sometimes hard to wrap your head around that, but our team does a great job tracking it. So that's my long answer into yes, we definitely referenced the original matte paintings of Rigel 7 and those earlier episodes to honor them. But of course, in every Star Trek series, time has moved on, so the aesthetics are changing.
Sure.
And we want the freedom to reinvent those aesthetics,
Yeah.
but we're still trying to familiarize ourselves with the same worlds.
So take me through a typical day for you. You're DP on an episode. What's your day look like? What do you do? How many setups do you do? How do you do your job, Benji?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I'll get into what a production day is like, but I want to say that the real job for me starts in prep. And it's a sort of have you ever heard Hitchcock famously describing his process as he wants to be so detailed and have so much forethought and storyboard everything that by the time he's on set, he feels like he's literally just grinding sausage. He knows exactly what he's going to do. Now we've just got to get it done. For us, it's not quite so predetermined, but the value is certainly there in prep because we're um, mentally chewing on all these ideas, thinking how can we succeed the most, how can we push the story the most. One of the great things about my experience on this show is that they want to hear from all those creatively involved, including me, and we're having discussions with the writers and director and everybody. Not to say that I'm doing anybody's job, but there's an open conversation. And when it comes down to how we're going to shoot something, we realize, oh, well, what about this detail? Would this thing cascade and turn it into this visual experience that we can have? Does this turn into a chase sequence, or does this turn into the ship is in low power mode, or this, how are we going to build this into a viewing experience? And everybody's very open to that, so that as a cinematographer, I want to push things towards the natural, obvious sort of direction, and that's going to give us good cinema. So after that process has culminated and we're there on day one or any other day, it starts with meeting with the director and the assistant director, whose job is to basically run the set. And they have a really interesting task of being in charge of the schedule and the day and making sure that we've completed the amount of work, but also hearing everybody and making sure that the quality of work that we are doing is at the highest level it can be. So they're really kind of like a moderator, but they have to wear a very special hat of understanding the creative, but also delegating the logistics. So that sort of three-person team is very intimately involved in setting the course of the day. And so we're walking the sets, we're going over some of the plans that we might have had. And then the actors will usually come after we've sat there and digested a little bit. And the amazing thing about film and TV in general, and on this show as well, is that the actors come in and they read their lines, and then they have the freedom to just play it out. And the director and I and the assistant director know a plan that we've set, and it's a very technical show, so it's sometimes difficult for a plan to get thrown out the window and to just wing it. It's tricky to do that. So we hope to try to guide it in a cohesive direction, but still the actors are given this freedom to just kind of find it. And if there's something that we think doesn't work, particularly the director, I think it's a really important relationship that they have, that the director and the actors really are have a trusting relationship. They can discuss whether something is a problem or maybe be better over here. And sometimes the actors are really open to, well, where would you like to put me and what do you see? But it's a really special, almost sacred moment when the actors are given the chance to be on the set, speaking the words in their costumes and,
Yeah.
feeling the scene. And sometimes a lot of magic gets revealed there to where whatever plan we might have had can be modified and we can honor this amazing moment that we just found. And from there, it's our super talented and experienced crew, a lot of which worked on other Star Trek shows, um, builds the shots and is working the sets. And we're doing a ton of lighting. And if we're on the AR wall, we're sometimes rotating the world and, just literally, hey, can we delete that mountain or can we add some more clouds over? It's just really fun, and that's where the photography process really is at its heart for me. Is once we've set the scene and we know the shots we're going to do and we've set things in motion, it's really my job to work with the crew and set up the shot.
Yeah.
So there's a timing to that, which is, well, I think we're going to need 15 minutes for this, or it's the beginning of the day. This might be a 45-minute thing. And we try to match the pacing of other things, like the actors have to change a wardrobe or they have to prepare for something else, or we're looking at this way in a set and we do what's called a turnaround. We look this way in a set and then we have to move equipment and things out of the way. So it's usually an understanding that there's a longer process for a turnaround. We sometimes say new deal, lots of other code words that mean we've got to move. We've got to look the other way now. So it is always a ticking clock. And sometimes you're having an in-depth discussion about the meaning of a shot or how it's really going to work. In the back of your head, you're always realizing this conversation has taken 3 minutes, and that's coming away from something, but it's still a really important discussion we have to have and things like that. So it's a healthy pressure. It's a pretty exciting job because of that. But at the end of the day, everybody is trying to get it done. And I love the show. So it's edifying for me to put that much effort into something that every little bit I try harder or think more thoroughly about, or am doing my homework, trying to juggle the logistics. Hopefully that translates to a better moment in an episode.
Yeah.
And if we do that enough, you end up with, I think, what the fans are calling something that they're really enjoying.
You came on to season 2, not having done season 1, and there, as we talked about, there are 3 different cinematographers working on this show. Are you referencing season 1 and being like, okay, we're continuing that aesthetic? Are you finding your own things? How's that work for you guys?
I've worked on other TV shows which were, I want to say, a little more focused on matching the established look.
Okay.
Every episode is always different. I think that TV has to have that. I would say shows maybe like House of Cards or things like that might be really cohesive. But every show that I've done tries to feel a little bit different from episode to episode. That said, when I had initial discussions about working on this project, again, coming from a history of shooting feature films and first seasons of shows, the idea of doing a second season, I was curious about whether I would need to fit in the box and continue on the same look. But the discussions we had were that every episode would be so different in its own genre that the door was wide open. And the creatives who I spoke with, the showrunners, Chris Fisher, the producing director, and also my initial discussions were with Glenn Keenan, the returning DP. So we were able to see eye to eye on a lot of things, and they assured me that there was a lot of freedom to have. So the ship is the ship, and the bridge is the bridge. So to completely undo it, I think would just be confusing. And there's certain looks that need to feel similar, like a red alert or a basic standard look for the bridge is something that you're going to want to continue. The sets also naturally lend themselves to looking a certain way. But that said, I was actually encouraged to um, uh, do something different with each scene or each episode, because there's capability there. An interesting thing about these sets, and credit to Jonathan Lee, the production designer, and Glenn, who worked with him to set these up, is that so much of the lighting, except for the bridge, which is behind you in your background, so much of the lighting is embedded into the surfaces and walls and ceiling of the sets themselves. In fact, you can, in certain circumstances, not put any lights on stands, movie lights on stands, and you can utilize the environmental light that the sets give off.
That's cool.
Which is really cool. So I was concerned at first about sticking to the look, but I can say confidently now, having done season 2 and having almost done season 3, that each episode really is different, and it's feels like a movie each episode, and that's really creatively freeing and exciting to be able to feel like you don't know what's going to happen next. And once again, I think that's a positive feedback that the audience is giving, is that what's next week going to be.
How do you shoot differently if you're on location? Because you do some location, and I don't know if you've done any location shoots for this season or not, but you're on location some of the time. A lot of the time you're on sets. So how do you shoot differently between being on location and being on a set?
This is very much an occasional location show. Other projects I've done were, entirely location or much more location heavy. But of course, we're in a sci-fi futuristic world. So what are you aiming the camera at that's going to work? In the episode number 2 at Astra, when Pike goes to the Illyrian world, that is a location. So the office of Nira, the lawyer, that was a location with a huge, window walls and things like that, which outside the walls, they needed to put another world. But he was in a waiting room. That was also in a location that was actually I believe, a former bank building or something like that. It had a sort of futuristic aesthetic, so we embraced that. It was Toronto. The show shoots in Toronto in February. So guess what's happening outside the windows? It's a blizzard. It's a full-on blizzard,
Good.
and it's tricky for the crew to have to work like that, which is why at that time of year we're scheduling, even though we're on location, we're scheduling interiors, because outside it's just really difficult to shoot. You don't want everybody to get stuck.
Yeah.
But it is a very different way of working. We just have to plan more. Locations can have more variables, a la the weather or other difficulties. We have to be in touch with municipal city organizations to make sure we have access, and just dealing with the logistics of being in an urban city where people need to get by, but we have to totally take over to do our job.
Yeah.
So there's different pressures. The trade-off is you've got real spaces. Sometimes on sets, or when you're building something artificially, or even in the AR wall, the task is always to succeed in suspending disbelief and make it feel real when it's very much not.
Yeah.
There's a funny anecdote I have that we would sometimes need to take a break for whatever reason during filming. On one of those breaks, we were on the AR wall, and I just walked onto this stage and set up a chair and just sat there on Rigel 7. And I was watching the snow drift over the mountains and the clouds move and all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, this is really great. But it's 20 feet away from a complete warehouse kind of backstage. It's just this interesting dichotomy. When you're on location, all the spaces are real and they're already built for you. So you get to walk in there. And creatively, sometimes there's a challenge with having too many options. You have to start a discussion about the story in order to create limitations and rules for yourself to follow, your team to follow. And from there, you come up with a style or a voice or a way of telling the story, which in some ways, almost anything goes as long as it continues. You continue the language. In a location, a lot of those limitations are already given to you. So it's a lot easier to sort of latch onto, well, this is what the space says. This is how we can use it, and this is how it'll work. But logistically, it's more challenging, and the crew sometimes grumbles like, location, even though we don't really go very often. It's a different way of working, especially because except for episode 3, which was shot in the past, which was our present.
Sure.
Except for that episode, everything has to look like another world or the future. So you're always retrofitting it.
So you're on season 3 of Strange New Worlds whenever it starts shooting.
We prepped it, and then didn't shoot it.
It must feel a lot like the pandemic to you.
It's like a hyper focused pandemic only for our industry. Which is a real mind twist, to say the least. That everyone else is now back to work, and now we're all of a sudden extremely not back to work. Because even during the pandemic, some things were able to figure out how to shoot. It was really their task to decide and strategize.
Sure, right.
What's our approach? But in this case,
Can't
it's just not going to happen. Yeah.
But
So
go to the grocery store.
we can do that. We can go in public and fraternize. But it's a sort of forced break, which has been great because we get to talk like we are now and reflect on the work that we did and put even more headspace into season 3. And me and the creative team are always keeping in touch about new ideas and like, hey, when we do come back, I got this idea and things like that. I mean, we're not working in ways that jeopardize the gist of the writer's strike and things like that. But we're creative people and we can't stop. So hopefully that means season 3 will be even better because we're digesting it even longer.
Well, Benji Bakshi, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been the most fun I've had in a long time. So I really appreciate you reaching out and coming and joining me. It's been a delight.
Absolutely. And hopefully everyone can look forward to episode 6 coming up shortly, and then the rest of the season, which will definitely be noteworthy.
If you liked this interview, check out our podcast, where in the latest edition I talked to Jordan Canning, director of Strange New Worlds Season 2, Episode 5, Charades. And if you want to ensure we continue to make content like this, why not support us on Patreon? Your donation not only helps us support the hosting fees for our website and podcast, but also helps us to pay our writers. Even a donation of as little as $1 a month helps to keep us running. Head over to www.patreon.com/Daily Star Trek News to help us out. But you've done episodes 2 and 4, and you've still got 6 and 9 coming up. And 9 is a very special episode that you're not talking about.
Yes, no, I'm not permitted to say much, and I will say that it will be a really fun viewing experience, and I'm really excited to have been a part of it. And I wish I could say more,